good evening. So tonight's story is by John Wyndham, who I'm a huge fan of, thanks to my mum. My mum read his stuff a lot when she was in at university. And when I was growing up, she lent me books like Trouble with Lichen, Crack and Wakes, and of course like Day of the Triffids, which was one of me. It still is one of my favourite, not just book, but like TV series and everything about it. I just think it's magic and horrible. And I was reminded of this story the other day when I was looking at some photos of Ripon Cathedral, which is one of my favourite cathedrals. Is that odd, having a favourite cathedral? I just love Ripon Cathedral. The Saxon Crypt underneath is just like the most amazing, dark, wonderful place. Anyway, we better have the story, haven't we? So this is called The Cathedral Crypt by John Wyndham. The past seems so close here, Clarissa said, as though she thought aloud. Somehow it hasn't been allowed to fade into dead history. Raymond nodded. He did not speak, but she could see that he understood and that he, like herself, felt the weight of antiquity pressing down upon this Spanish city. Half unconsciously, she elaborated, most of our cities strive for change. They throw away the past for the sake of progress. And there are few, like Rome, truly eternal cities which sail majestically on, absorbing change as it comes. But I don't feel that this city is quite like that. Here the past seems arrogant, as if it were fighting against the present. It's determined to conquer all the new forces. Look at that, for instance. A car, new and glossy, was standing before the cathedral door. A priest blessed it with upraised hands while he murmured prayers for the safety of the travellers. Commending it to the care of God and the charge of St. Christopher, Raymond remarked. At home they say that the cars empty the churches. Here they even bring the car to church. You're right, my dear. The past is not going to give in here without a battle. The car, with its celestial premium paid, drove on its way, and with it went all sign of the 20th century. Late sunlight poured upon a scene entirely medieval. It flooded the cathedral's western face, turning it from grey to palest rose, showing it as something which was more than stone upon stone, a thing which lived, though it rested eternally. The fragile beauty of living things was built into those Gothic spears which sped heavenward. Such traceries and filigrees, such magnificent aspiration could not absorb men's art and lives, and yet remain mere stone. Something of the builders' souls was swept up to live forever among those clustered pinnacles. It's very, very lovely, Clarissa whispered. It makes me feel small and rather frightened. Over the dark doorways, a row of stone saints in their niches stretched across the facade. Above them, a rose window stared like a cyclops' unblinking eye. Higher still, gargoyles leered sunward, keeping their ceaseless watch for devils. The cathedral was a fantasy of faith that spirit had helped to build it, no less than hands. A dream in stone on a foundation of souls. Yes, that is beauty, Raymond said. He stepped towards the open doors. Clarissa, on his arm, hung back a little. She didn't know why. Beauty can awe. But can it alone send a deeper prick of fear? We're going inside? She asked. Her husband caught the tone of her voice. He looked at her with a tinge of surprise. He would obey any wish of hers willingly. The world held nothing dearer than Clarissa. She'd become even more precious in the 3 weeks since their marriage. You'd rather not? You tired? Clarissa shook away her vague fears. They were a foolishness unworthy of her. Besides, Raymond obviously wanted to go in. No, of course we must look at it. They say the inside is even more beautiful than the outside, she agreed. But as they walked about the huge, darkening palace, her uneasiness came creeping back. Ethereal fears clustered within and around her. Clinging, but impalpable. She fastened to Raymond and his firm reality, trying to share his pleasure in the pictures, shrines and sculptures. Together they gazed up at the huge shining crucifix slung from the distant roof, but her mind did not follow his words as he admired it. She was thinking how quiet, how lonely it was in this great place. Here and there 1 or 2 dim figures moved silently as ghosts. Points of light shone in far dark corners like in the stars in the blackness of space. There was a sense of peace, but not the peace of tranquility. They crossed to the side chapels where Raymond took a lengthy interest in the decorations and furnishing. Some time had passed before he looked up and noticed his wife's pallor. What is it? You're not ill, darling? No, she reassured him. No, I'm quite all right. It was the truth. There was nothing wrong with her save an overwhelming desire to get back to the familiarities of noises and people. Anyhow, we'd better go. They'll be wanting to close the place soon, Raymond said. They returned to the central aisle and turned towards the entrance. Now that the sun had set, the western end was very dim. The lights were few and feeble. Pale candles and a lamp or two. The rose window was no more than a blur. The shape of the doorway, invisible. With misgiving, Raymond hastened his steps. Clarissa clutched his arm more tightly. Surely they haven't, he began, but left the sentence unfinished as they both saw that the heavy doors were shut. They must have overlooked us when we were in that chapel, he said with more cheerfulness than he felt. I'll try knocking. But the pounding of his fists against the massive doors was childishly futile. Sledgehammer blows could scarcely have been heard through those solid timbers. Together they shouted. Their voices fled away through the empty arches. The second, flung from wall to wall, returned to them, a distorted, eerie travesty. Don't, implored Clarissa. Don't shout any more. It frightens me. Raymond stopped at once, but he did not admit in words that he too felt fearful at the echoes, as though he were disturbing things which should be left to sleep. Perhaps there's a smaller door open somewhere, he suggested, but with little hope in his tones. Their heels clicked sharply on the flagstones as they searched. Clarissa fought down an absurd impulse to walk on tiptoe. Each door they tried seemed equipped with a more loudly clattering latch and more raucously grinding bolts than the last. A few opened, but none of these led into the open. Locked, Raymond said disgustedly as they reached the main door once more. Every single entrance locked. I'm afraid we're prisoners." Half-heartedly, he hammered again on the wood. "But we can't stay here." There was a piteous sound in Clarissa's voice, like a child imploring not to be left in the dark. He put his arm round her, and she pressed thankfully closer. "We must. There's no help for it. After all, it might be worse. We're together and we're perfectly safe." "Yes, but... oh, I suppose it's silly to be afraid." "There's nothing to be afraid of, darling. We can go back into that little chapel and make ourselves as comfortable as we can in there, so that we'll forget that all this outer part exists. There are cushions on the benches and we can use hassocks for pillows. Oh, we might be worse off." Raymond woke suddenly at the slight movement of Clarissa in his arms. "What is it?" he mumbled sleepily. "Shh. Listen," she told him. She watched his face as he obeyed, part fearful lest he should not hear the sound, but in greater part hoping that he would prove it a hallucination. He sat upright. Yeah, I can hear it. What on earth?" He glanced at his watch. It showed 1:30. "What can they be doing at this time?" They listened in silence for some moments. The confused sound down by the entrance clarified into a chant of massive solemnity. No words could reach them, only harmony rising and falling like the surge of long, slow waves. Raymond half rose. Clarissa seized his arm, her voice imploring. No, you mustn't, it's... She stopped, at a loss. There was no word to express her sensation, but it touched him too, like a warning. He relaxed and dropped back into the seat. The voices approached slowly. The chant rolled on. Occasionally it would rise from its ululation to a paean, then sink back again into woeful monotony. The two in the chapel crept forward until only one high-backed bench hid them from the nave. There they crouched, peering out into the dimness. The slow procession passed. First the acolytes with swinging censers, behind them a cross-bearer, then a single robed figure, leading a dozen brown-habited monks, chanting, their faces uncertainly lit by the candles they carried. Then sisters of some black-robed order, their faces gleaming, white as paper out of their sombreness. Then 2 more monks, holding by ropes a lonely nun. She was young, not ageless like the rest, but the beauty of her face was submerged in anguish. Bright tears of fear and misery poured from her wide eyes, trickling down upon her clothes. She could not brush them away, nor hide her face, for her arms were tightly bound behind her back. Now and then her voice rose in a frightened call above the chanting, a weak, thin cry which choked in a tightened throat. She darted glances right and left, twisted to look behind her in hopeless desperation. Twice she hung back, writhing her arms in their cords. The 2 monks before her pulled on the ropes, dragging her forward. Once she fell to her knees and, with lips moving, gazing up at the immense cross in the roof, she implored mercy and forgiveness. But the tugging ropes forced her on. Clarissa turned horrified eyes to her husband. She saw that he also had understood and knew the right which was to follow. He murmured something too low for her to catch. The deliberate procession with its spangle of candles approached the altar, each row genuflected before it turned away to the left. Despair seemed to snap the last stay of hope in the nun as she passed it, drooping. Raymond leaned further out of the chapel to watch the file disappear into a small doorway. Then he returned to his wife and took her hand. Neither of them spoke. Clarissa was too deeply shocked for speech. A nun who had broken her vows. She knew the old punishment for that. They would put her... She shuddered and clutched at Raymond's hand the tighter. They couldn't do that. Not now. Centuries ago, perhaps, but not today. But the thought of her own words came back to her. The past seemed so close here, she'd said. She shuddered again. Sound stole out of the little door into the cathedral. A short, weak scuffle. Something between a gasp and a whimper. A voice which spoke in heavy, sonorous tones. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. A muffled clash. The ring of the trowel on the stone. Clarissa fainted. They're gone, Raymond was saying. Come quickly. What? Clarissa was still uncertain and bemused. Come along, we may be in time to save her yet. There must be a little air in there. He was pulling Clarissa by the wrist, dragging her after him out of the chapel towards the small door. But what if they should come back? They've gone, I tell you. I heard them bolt the big doors. But Clarissa was terrified. If the monks found out that there had been witnesses, what then? Hurry, or we'll be too late. Raymond seized a candle from its altar and pulled at the small door. For its size, it was heavy and swung back slowly. He ran down the curving flight of stone steps beyond, Clarissa at his heels. The crypt below was small. One candle sufficed to show all there was to see. The two side walls were smooth. It was the one opposite at which they stared. It showed the shape of two niches long filled in, three more niches empty and darkly waiting, and one lighter patch of new stones and white mortar. Raymond set down his candle and ran to the recent work, one hand fumbling for the knife in his pocket. Clarissa raked at the damp mortar with her fingernails. Just enough to let us get a hold on this stone, he muttered as he scraped. He clenched his strong fingers on its edges. At his first heave it loosened. A second pull, and it fell with a thud at his feet. But there was another sound in the crypt. They whirled round to stare into the expressionless faces of 6 monks. In the morning, only one niche stood empty and darkly waiting. I like that one. It kind of reminds me of being in a quiet church and, like, even though it's a place of holy sanctity, there's something inherently creepy and unsettling about it. So, speaking of creepy and unsettling, I shall be back next Sunday with another story. I hope you guys are staying well and safe. And thank you for watching.